it's Stephen Bedard, and I'd actually like to start a bit of a mini-series here on my YouTube channel, looking at some of my concerns about evangelicalism. And first of all, I need to kind of put out where I am, and I most days identify as an evangelical, although some would probably look at me and say that I am too liberal to be an evangelical, but that's okay because there's lots of people who think I am too conservative as well. It is kind of lonely being in the middle. Just to give you a little bit of a background of where I've come from theologically, I grew up in a liberal mainline denomination and just kind of accepted all of that, and that's all I knew of Christianity. And eventually, after a break of attending church, I ended up in a very conservative Pentecostal church. I would say at the time would be considered fundamentalist. Of course, fundamentalist and Pentecostal have a strained relationship, but it was in there anyways. Very, very conservative church. And since that time have generally identified as evangelical. But in recent years, with an emphasis on people coming out as ex-evangelical or ex-evangelical, as it is sometimes called, I've had to think through a lot of my beliefs and where I fit in the evangelical world. And I do think that evangelicalism is a pretty wide tent. However, I think that there are a lot of people who are concerned about how wide it is and would probably like to limit that variety somewhat. So the first thing that I want to talk about, one of the concerns that I've had about evangelicalism, and maybe one of the reasons that sometimes I have considered becoming an ex-evangelical, is where some evangelicals place the roles of men and women in the church and in the family. And I realize this is a huge can of worms. Do I really want to open that? Yes, I guess I do want to open it. I will tell you that I began from a place of probably saying that I was against women in ministry, and then to a point where I just wasn't sure, maybe had some concerns. But I definitely am in a place now where I accept women in ministry. In fact, the office that you see behind me is the office I share with my wife. We are co-pastors at Brookfield Baptist Church. I am not the senior pastor. She's not the associate. We don't give her a title of director to make sure that she doesn't think she's a pastor. We are co-pastors, equal authority, equal teaching, all of those things. And so I definitely have come to a place where I accept women in ministry. But that's not exactly where I want to go with this video. It's not the problem of that there are some people who are for women in ministry and some people who are against women in ministry. My concern within some corners of evangelicalism is that some seem to see the roles of men and women as being one of the primary doctrines, that they want to put that very high up. In fact, we might have the Trinity and the atonement and the resurrection of Jesus here, and traditional roles of men and women got to be just below that because that is so important. We need to hold on to that. We need to do whatever we can to make sure that women know their place and they're not intruding on where men are supposed to be at, and men need to take a hold of those traditional roles and hold on to them firmly and not let those women get any gains there. And we've seen that there definitely is more than just concerns about women being involved in ministry. A lot of the revelations that have come out in church about religious trauma have revealed that in some ways, in some instances, churches have covered up trauma because they felt that it would threaten these rules, and that there was a place for women to endure trauma because that was their job, was to support the man and to make sure that the men get to do their ministry, and women are just going to have to deal with that because the men are making things happen. And that might seem like a pretty cynical interpretation, but that's really what I have seen. That I've seen in recent years certain corners of evangelicalism really scrambling to do whatever they could to hold on to traditional roles as much as possible, way beyond saying, you know what, we just don't want a female pastor on staff at our congregation. Yeah, it goes far beyond that. That they really want to emphasize as much as possible in every area that men and women have to hold on to their traditional roles, and that women have to be subservient, and they need to submit to men, with very little talk of how husbands should love their wives as Christ loved the church, which actually was a kind of a submissive love since he submitted to the cross. But we don't want to talk about that. Maybe we want to talk about the love for our wives, and that we are making sure that they hold on to their traditional rules, and that's the best way we can love them. I'm not convinced of that. But again, it's not about a disagreement over the role of men and women. It's about lifting that so high that they actually interpret other areas of theology through that lens, that has to be the hill that we die on, is the traditional role of men and women. And we see this right now in some of the discussions about the Trinity. And there are those who are working hard to provide a theological foundation for women to be equal but submissive, by showing that the Son has eternally submitted to the Father. And that is just an example of that. We wouldn't even be working towards that if there weren't theologians who were working hard to find a strong theological foundation for the traditional roles of women. So I don't see at the heart of the gospel Jesus trying to work to make sure the traditional roles of men and women are held onto, that is the ideal focus for the church. I don't even see that in Paul. Paul gets a rap for being anti-woman. And if you read Romans chapter 16 and you look at how many women he mentions there, and women who are actually in leadership, it's pretty clear that in Romans 16 a lot of women in leadership mentioned there. So I don't even think Paul fits into that. But I really don't think the gospel is primarily about keeping those traditional roles of men and women. The gospel is much bigger. And when I see evangelicals fighting so hard to keep that front and center, it really makes me question if I want to be a part of this evangelical movement. So that's the first venting that I want to do about this, and I will bring up some other topics as the days go by. Make sure to visit me at my website, stephenjbedard.com, and follow me on Facebook and on Twitter and so on, and make sure to subscribe to this channel. Thank you, and God bless.